Okay, so recording. If you could just mute yourself, that would be helpful. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to get started. It is recorded for anybody who jumps on late. I'll be admitting people as they come in. But just for time's sake, I was trying to keep this to a little under an hour, and I'm not in a rush, but I know it's a long day for a lot of people, myself included. So a lot of people, let's see. A lot of people already know of me, obviously. A lot of people have seen posts with Dr. Caroline. I've been giving you shout outs all week, but I'm really excited to have you on, and thank you for taking time out of your hectic day to jump on this as well. But our topic is first things first, prioritizing our mental health. And as part of KD Coaching, I think it's really important to talk about this just with everything going on, and sometimes we lose track of what's really important. So I have like 5 topics, I guess you could say, and I threw some questions in there to engage people. If you could relate or have any questions, Dr. Caroline would be a great person to ask, and just get 2 perspectives. That's how I've kind of been going about it, but there's no particular format or anything like that. So that was our discussion today. That was influenced by just a lot of chaos going on in the world. So yeah, I'm really excited. Do you want to like introduce yourself formally?
Sure. So thanks for having me. I'm excited to hear everyone's questions or perspectives as well, and making it really interactive. I love that stuff, and just being able to answer anything I can. But my background is in clinical psychology. That's where the doctorate comes from. And I specialize in marriage and family therapy. So it's something that's very important to me when it comes to relationships and those dynamics. And it's not just our romantic relationships, but our friends, our coworkers, just how we operate in systems. I really have a strong foundation in that, and I love like learning more and more. I don't think I'm an expert, but I definitely have had over I would say a decade of experience as well. And now I'm a coach, but my background is in clinical psychology, but I focus now on women entrepreneurs, and a lot of that goes around mental health aspects of self-love, boundaries, and really being able to have emotional balance within our relationships. And that goes to prioritizing our mental health, because it's not something we can see as clearly as maybe our physical health. So I'm excited to dive into the conversation, but that's a little bit about me.
Yes. And if you would be so kind, do you mind, like before we hop off of this, just putting in where people can find you? Because I do know that you're doing your Sunday lives or your talk shows, and she's highlighting a lot of really important topics like boundaries, self-love. We did a few already, so if you want to jump on those and see other people in the field that are really good in those areas, so you can put those in the chat for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right, so I'm just going to continue on here. Like I said, I'll let people in as they come on, but feel free to keep your cameras on if you'd like. I'd rather see faces than names, but I totally understand if you're not comfortable. And then if you want to raise your hand or chat or put any reaction emojis and what have you, I'll keep my chat open here so we can engage with you. All right, so with that being said, again, our topic is first things first, prioritizing our mental health. And I was like really struggling with how to do an introduction for this, but I really think it's important to just highlight some statistics, and I'm not going to bore everyone. I do like stat, but I figured it was important just to kind of know what triggered this whole conversation, because after doing some research, I'm like, it's a much needed topic. So for me, 2 things I wanted to highlight was just kind of if there's an age difference with how people are going about seeking mental health and why not. And then also gender, like female versus male, because that opens up a conversation of how you can support anybody in your life, you know, who might be withholding from getting help or just struggling in that area. So after I review that, I just want to hit on like self-awareness, some barriers that we might have with getting help or just taking care of our mental health in general. And I have a bunch of other stuff, but like I said, we'll get to all that. So after doing my research, I realized that according to research from 2019 and 2020, there's only 21% of our US population that technically is diagnosed with any mental health just like anything. It could be depression, anxiety, trauma. They have to have an actual diagnosis though for them to be counted in this population, right? So I was like, wow, that's a really low number, but they're only pulling from, you know, a year or two worth of data, right? So that's not accounting for the history of mental health in our country. So that number though translates to almost 53 million people in our country that have some kind of diagnosis. So that means they've either saw somebody, got admitted, or are seeking treatment. Does that make sense? So that's like, percentage wise, it doesn't seem like a lot, but when you put a number on that, 53 million, that could be anybody around you at this point. And so it also translates to, I think, 1 in 5 people. So the next thing I wanted to know, so like I said, that's anybody with mental health. So I wanted to see anybody with severe mental health, meaning it's to the point that it impairs them, right? They cannot function, they cannot work. There's a lot of people on disability for mental illness, right? So I kind of was interested to see that number as well. And that's only 6%, but that translates to almost 14 million people in our nation. And this is all people over the age of 18, by the way. So like when I hear that number, I'm like, 14 million, that's a lot, right? And that's not accounting for like our youth and our adolescents who struggle the most. So I'm almost wrapping up this section, I promise. The next thing, I was like, race, right? Like, is there this like discrepancy between which type of race is actually going to seek help and why or why not? And when I think about it, some of us are not fortunate enough, right? We don't have the same opportunities to get help. So that's one thing. And then just our societal norms, right? Like just certain races, like not believing in things like that, going to get help or what have you. So there's a lot of different things that can come in the way of people actually seeking help. So what I found was that Caucasians and mixed people are the only 2 huge categories of people that go seek treatment. So that leaves out Blacks, that leaves out Hispanics, right? And a whole Asians, a whole group of other people. So I thought that was really interesting. And I don't know how much of that's related to other things outside of opportunity and societal norms is my point. And then 2 more things. So people over the age of 50 are the most likely to be engaged in some kind of help. So that leaves out the highest group of people that are suffering right now, which is the 25 to 36-year-old age group, right? So I found that interesting. Like people in their 50s and older are the ones that are actually like seeking that, right? And it says over half of adults with mental illness actually don't receive any treatment at all. So with all of that being said, that was like a lot, but it made sense in my head a little bit that we have to be more intentional about people we come across, because it could literally be anybody, and just kind of encouraging people to not be worried about age or gender or any of that, but like if you need help, speak up and get the help that you need, right? My last quick thing that I didn't write on here, I forgot, was that suicides are more prevalent in males by use of firearm, which I'm not shocked when I hear that. When females are the most, that's the gender that's more prevalent to seek treatment. So males are like not going out of their way to find that. And then I link that to maybe just a sense of like lacking vulnerability. And then these societal norms that guys have to just, you know, be strong and be their provider and not get help, you know, and they suffer with the highest suicide rate. So I'm going to shut up now. Does anybody have any feedback with that? Or Dr. Caroline, do you have a perspective based on what I said?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if anyone else is just taking the time to gather their thoughts, but I know for me, like hearing those numbers, it's alarming, but I'm not surprised. Just even like when I was practicing in private practice, I would see a lot more females than males, but more males were open to it. And I think the younger generations are now being so much more open to getting help and seeking help. It's not that stigma. There's still a complete stigma, and especially culturally, I think you hit on it perfectly, where some cultures it's completely a negative thing to go to therapy. I know like when I worked at an all boys Catholic high school years ago, and a lot of my kids of different backgrounds, their parents wouldn't be okay with them seeing me because they're like, we aren't crazy, we don't have problems. in reality, the kid just needed help, and being able to ask for that and having the tool set to do that, to deal with life, to deal with problems that do come up. But I do think that men have a harder time asking for help, just based off of the research, based off of what I've seen in the practice when I work there. But that's what I just wanted to add, because it's alarming, the numbers, especially when you put the percentage to the actual number versus just a percentage. It really puts it in like crystal clear of the issues that are happening that are not being addressed.
Yeah.
This is Gregory Bell. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. Hi. One other thing that I was just thinking about when you were giving the statistics about people seeking help in societal norms. And we think about societal norms in the way of people going to get help. But that means that there, first of all, has to be an identification or realization of their help is needed.
Yes. And
the other side of societal norms is that dysfunction in certain cultures and socioeconomic groups can be more normalized than others, and it's like they're comfortable with dysfunction.
Yes.
Not really realizing that it's a mental health issue for which needs to, they need to get some type of help or treatment or whatever. So I just kind of experienced that over time, that some people don't even realize they need help when they're in desperate need of help, because it's so normal for them to be in this condition.
Yes. Thank you for that. I completely agree. And it leads us to my first point, which is self-awareness.
There you go.
Great segue.
Great segue. Thank you. Yeah, so thanks for letting me rattle that off. I think it's super important, though, to put some numbers to some things because they don't lie. So my first topic of the day in regards to this is, like I said, self-awareness and understanding the signs of things not being okay. And they're different for everybody. So like we have different pain thresholds, different emotional distress levels, all of that stuff. So my question for Dr. Caroline is, how would you suggest people start to become self-aware if they're not already, and acknowledge signs that they're not okay? And then what do they do with that, aside from traditional therapy? Because, clearly not everyone does that.
Well, I think the first thing is making sure like you've seen a physician. So there's nothing like medically wrong. If like you notice like maybe fatigue or tired, that could be something clinically wrong, but it might be something on the physical aspect. So I just always, like, even when clients would come to me for therapy, before I would even give a diagnosis, especially like if I was working with insurance, I had to, because I don't like to do diagnosis. But when I would have to, I would make sure that they've seen a physician, that everything was ruled out to make sure it was nothing else, because that sometimes does play a part. It could be your nutrition as well, if you're not sleeping enough, not eating enough. But the things that we can do, if like in addition to therapy, is getting outside, like being in nature, even just having the sun hit your face. Depending on where you live, of course, it might not be super sunny, but being able to have that fresh air can really do wonders. Regular basis, not just once and be like, okay, well, it's not working, I'm fine. Like, I'm not fine, what's going on? But I think when we do it regularly, like I even had an experience, I did a detox like a few weeks ago, and I was feeling really fatigued and tired, and it wasn't anything emotionally, but I noticed with getting enough sleep, drinking enough water, and my nutrition, switching that a little bit, my energy levels like increased by like 100-fold of just being able to do the basic necessities. And I think I was taking it for granted. I'm a pretty healthy person, but I noticed even just that switch really made such a difference in my life, and cutting out as much caffeine as I was drinking. I'm kind of a coffee addict, but I definitely reduced that. But I think it's those things that we do, but it's also things like meditating. And meditating is not just sitting there like listening to an audio or like a pre-recorded guided meditation, or just sitting in silence. Because a lot of times when I first started meditating, I was like, I have too many thoughts. What's going on? My mind's racing. But recognizing too, it's not just those two aspects of meditating. It can be prayer. It can be painting. It can be being by the water, the mountains, depending on where you live, or just being going to the gym. Sometimes that's meditation, a form of meditation, dance. So it doesn't have to just be sitting there listening to something. It can be so many different facets. So looking at that as well can be really helpful, and not labeling it as like it's one way or that's it. So that's just some things, but also I think too, it's who's your support system outside of if you are going to therapy, like who can you trust with everything or with a lot of things? Like, do you have a significant other, your friends, are they really uplifting? Noticing too your energy around people, because sometimes if you're around people that might be a little bit more negative, that can really bring you down as well. So just kind of checking your circle, who's in that to support you too. And one thing I do with my friends, because we all have crazy lives and things going on, but really checking in with them before I unload on them. I always say, are you emotionally available right now for me? And vice versa. A lot of like my therapy friends, but coaching friends and other people too, because it's the self-awareness piece as well of like, hey, like I'm going through a lot. I know you might be going through a lot. Can you handle this right now? If not, then going to somebody else. That can be really helpful too for both people. And then also journaling is a great way to like just release things that are going on. Just pen to paper, something does it. I don't know what it is, but psychologically, it does really help us impact like the impact of releasing it. Because I think when we hold things inside, it can really be damaging in so many different ways to every aspect of our health. And I could rattle on more, but I don't want to continue to talk, but I'll let you.
No, it's really good, because the more I'm doing this and saying it out loud, like everyone's coping skill, it's aligned, you know, like people aren't just saying like, get outside for no reason. It's actually proven to work, you know? So it's really good that you reiterate those things, even if we've heard it, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't know, I'll open the floor to anybody that's had a hard time like recognizing what signs of you struggling, like recognizing that you were, let me rephrase that, understanding signs that things were not okay. Did you struggle with that? And then at what point was it like a clarity moment, like I got to start working on this? And then how did you kind of go about addressing that? Because I think we say stuck and we don't get to the point of addressing it. So like, how did you understand signs that you weren't okay? If you're comfortable, anybody sharing with that? Okay, going once, going twice.
I'll share. This is Gregory again. Okay. For me, when my mind starts to move faster than my life, and it's racing, and I can't seem to slow it down, to be in a moment, it's I start to feel like, okay, something's off, and I need to find out what it is. So that's kind of like a trigger for me when my mind is like spinning out of control.
Yep.
With thoughts of the what ifs and the plans of what I need to do when I haven't really fully dealt with what's right in front of me.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you say that, because when we actually say it out loud, people can relate. And sometimes we can't recognize like, well, I'm dealing with this and I'm perfectly fine, when it's actually not normal to have constant racing thoughts. So like, that's my point in asking, because we can just relate to that. Oh, somebody said they could relate to that in the chat. Look at that. So racing thoughts. Anybody else with a sign that you know things are just not okay for you?
Yeah, I'll go. I think it's good that you're talking about self-awareness and all, because I kind of had a wake-up call today at work. And also being aware of those around you that are not so healthy either. So I experienced something today. I've been at the brink of exhaustion, working a lot, and it's been intense. And so, you know, you do what you have to do, you know, on a daily basis. You just, you know, keep pressing through. Usually I don't take a moment to stop and just breathe. And I just keep going and going. And so by the time I get home, I'm extremely exhausted and I'm just ready to shower and go to bed and do it all over again. And so today, unfortunately, I had one of my colleagues who came to me and said, "Hey, are you okay?" And I said, "Yes, I'm fine. What's going on?" He goes, "No, you're not fine. Are you okay?" And I said, "Why do you ask?" And he said, "Well, someone came to me and said you weren't too nice to them today." And in that moment, I stopped and I says, what do you mean? I'm not a mean person. I'm, part of my job is to provide, very prestige and excellent customer service. So I'm like, I didn't realize that I didn't treat somebody nice today. And he goes, well, I know that that's not like you. So that's why I wanted to ask you, is everything okay? And so in that moment, I had a reality check and I said, actually, no, I'm not okay. I said, I'm exhausted. I'm very fatigued. I haven't been able to sleep well or anything. I'm exhausted. So if that did happen, I was not aware of that, but actually thank you for bringing that to my attention so that I can become more self-aware. And so it's interesting that you are talking about this now. So, of course, now when I go back to work tomorrow, I will be more self-aware because I wouldn't want to make anyone feel that way again, And so we don't know, like the different people, some people take things very personal. I don't know to the extreme that that person felt that I didn't treat them well or anything, but obviously it bothered them, it hurt them. And so I wish I knew who it was because I would make it right. But unfortunately, I don't know where that person is, mentally, physically, personally, I don't know. So it's a shame that I don't have an opportunity to redeem myself. But now I'm aware. So yeah, this helps. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. So Dr. Caroline, do you want to share like one big symptom where you're just not okay? I'll be vulnerable and share one of mine. And then we could just kind of keep it moving, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, Rosa, you brought up a really good point of just like your energy levels. Mm-hmm. So because where I experienced burnout a couple of years ago, that's why I left the field. It got to be too much, other factors as well. But I think I was crying in the bathroom a lot. I was not taking a lunch break. I had scheduled because I had 30 clients that like each week, roughly. And through that, I wasn't really taking care of myself. My hair started falling out. Like I started getting a lot of physical symptoms. My weight was just dropping off. And I was like going in between sessions just to go to the bathroom if I had time. So I just wasn't taking care of myself. But the biggest thing was when my health started to get affected, mostly the hair, because I was like, oh my gosh, my hair, because that was a defining moment of me, but also the weight and just other factors with my health. But I think when we are running ourselves into the ground, because burnout is a cycle, unless you start to catch the cycle faster. And I think it is a process, especially if you have ingrained a new work ethic, like, well, I need to be working so hard instead of working smarter. Mm-hmm. But I think it comes down, and that's why I'm such an advocate for self-love and self-care, is to take care of ourselves. But the biggest thing is when you start to see those physical symptoms, it's already gone too far. So how do you catch it before it becomes that? And that's where self-care really comes into play. And it's the practice. Practice makes progress. I don't think practice makes perfect, but it definitely makes progress.
Yeah. I'd say I have a lot, but one big one for me is like, I don't like sleeping. I think I'm missing out on things when I sleep for some reason. So when I start, to just crave my bed and like, just don't want to see the outdoors, like that for me is like, Kristal, like something is not right. Cause I love rest, don't get me wrong, but oversleeping for me is a big one that I, either have to call somebody or start, using my skills. So yeah, if you don't want to share now, that's completely fine. If you want to type something in the chat, we could always speak that way. But the next point, just really quickly, that I wanted to make is recognizing barriers that don't allow us to put our mental health first. And I feel like this is really important to sit in this for a minute or two. It could be other people if you are just such a people pleaser, right? And that's really dangerous. Like you put other people before yourself. Work, not being able, I hear a lot of people say I can't take time off. Well, what good are you for your everyday calling or purpose when your mind's not right? Right? A lack of resources is understandable. Pastor Greg's on here. He mentioned a lot, just people being not addicted, but grow up in chaos or dysfunction. So that, not denial, but if that's something you're used to, it's hard to accept that oh, I have something going on, right? Or something's not okay. And lastly, stigma I had. No, I'm not depressed, because if I am, somebody's going to think I'm weak, right? So those are just some things I wanted to throw out there, because if that's you, people pleasing, work's getting in the way, anything that I listed, I want you to ask yourself, what is it that you're gaining out of putting those things before yourself? So just some food for thought, because I'm pretty sure one of those can relate to somebody in here. Dr. Caroline, do you want to share on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with every single one of those. I was that person where it's like, I can't take time off. Like my clients need me. And like, I was in this like headspace, or even like when I did other jobs and in the corporate world, I never felt I could take off, because it's almost like it was a badge of honor of like my work ethic, when in reality, nothing of that mattered when it came to my health. Because if you don't have your health, you don't have anything else. And that includes mental health. Mm-hmm. But I think it's so much harder because it's not something tangible that you see. It happens over time if you don't address it. And it's being preventative versus reactive, if we can be. And I think, I mean, there's so many barriers that do happen, or just family dynamics can be like what Kristal was saying too, the chaos, and from Pastor Greg, she's mentioned. But I think too, it's really important to just recognize when these barriers come, what is it doing for you? How is that helping you move forward? How is that energizing you and filling your cup? Or is your cup depleted every single day?
Yes. All right. So I listed them there if you want to take some time to think about it some more, whatever might be your barrier. 3 and 4, though, are huge. So everyone pay attention. Ready?
Let's go.
Okay. This is your expertise, Dr. Caroline. So I have boundaries in here, because people struggle with boundaries, and Dr. Caroline actually has a whole thing on this. We lack creating boundaries, so that comes in the way of putting our mental health first, right? And then something else that goes hand in hand with this is like an issue of control. And I don't know if people could relate to this at all, but when you put people first sometimes, or always need people to need you, that's a control issue, believe it or not. So I just want you to think about that for a second. If you crave or need to be needed, that's a control issue. So with that being said, they kind of go hand in hand. Like, I need to create boundaries, work on my control issues, and start putting up these strong boundaries so that I'm no longer like just doing everything for everybody else all the time, if that makes sense. And I know if like you're a family person, right, or really struggle with communicating, that's when those things can get really difficult for people. So your yes being your yes, your no being your no. So I'd be interested to know, Dr. Caroline, I think you're on mute. Do you, since you're so knowledgeable and boundaries is your like favorite topic, what would you have to say in terms of how that would impact somebody really putting their mental health before anything else?
Yeah, I think like putting ourselves first when we haven't in the past, like the people pleasing is a huge part of the struggle with setting boundaries, because a lot of times there's this perception that if you set a boundary, you're being mean or rude or not thinking of the other person. In reality, it is standing in your power. It's your self-worth, your value, and you value both aspects, like the person and you. However, if you do not prioritize your mental health, it's going to show up in other ways, in other aspects, and that relationship. Yes. And it's almost, you're suppressing it. But I think that's the biggest thing.
Yes.
Did you keep going?
No, I'm good. That was good. I think that a lot of people definitely struggle with this more than we realize. And the minute we can stop feeling guilt, I guess you could say, right? That definitely plays a big part in this, just feeling guilt and not being able to say no and things like that. But I don't know, something shifted when I hit 30, I feel like, where not that I don't care, but I definitely want to put myself first, and not in a selfish way. So if anyone could take anything from what I'm saying, it's like, just shift in perspective. Like, you're not being selfish if you're not well and you're putting yourself first, if that translates well. So does anybody else have any feedback when it comes to struggling with maintaining strong boundaries and how that has affected like your state at all, or how it can? Or how you've been able to say yes or no.
Hi, this is Kristen. Sorry if my dogs bark in the background. I guess The biggest thing for me is like, and like you said, like I think as like time has progressed, like I grew up in a family where like people were really strict and they wanted to judge you. So I think a lot of the time my mental health was affected because I was always trying to please like my parents. I wanted them to think that I was everything that they wanted me to be, kind of thing. And as I grew up, like, and I've matured, I've realized that like my happiness comes first. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, do I want them to be like happy too? But it's also sometimes what I want isn't what they want. So you have to kind of find that boundary of where what you're doing makes you happy should make them happy too.
Definitely. I agree with that. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I think sometimes, and we've always learned this, through our faith, is that sometimes you have to say a painful no for a quality yes. And I think that part of my issue today, when we actually had a meeting, and you'd be surprised how many people were free to speak on how burnt out they were and everything. But you're right, part of the problem of burnout for us is because we're short staffed. And that's kind of something that's very prevalent now, throughout our country, that not a lot of people, are coming to work. And so it's easier to stay home for many, for whatever the reason is, no judgment here. The bottom line is that a lot of the companies are short staffed. So that leaves the rest of us picking up most of the slack, and it's causing burnout. And so, one of the managers today said, you can't, every department has to be responsible for their own actions. And so that we can't jump into everything to one. We want to help, but we can't do that, because in the interim, we're going to be the ones that are going to pay the price later on, because we are going to be mentally burnt out, physically burnt out, and all that. So he mentioned today, he goes, just, it's okay to say a humbling no. It's okay to say that and kindly decline. And so I think that was at the brink that I was at today, where like, okay, I know that there's a need that needs to be met everywhere. How can I fill that need? But then my stuff is falling behind and no one's supporting me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't have a choice today but to say quite a few no's today. And it was frustrating. I didn't want that, but I didn't have a choice because I was exhausted. So yes, having to say sometimes a painful no for a quality yes, it's worth it.
Agreed. I have a question for Dr. Caroline. I did write in there in the chat, communicating unapologetically though, because you often know when we tell somebody like, no, we're like, I'm sorry. And it's that guilt. So I want to just encourage everybody that if you say no this week or next time you say no and it's to benefit you, that you're not apologizing after. Okay. All right.
I love that.
Yes. So Dr. Caroline, what would you say in your years of working with people is one of the biggest boundaries that is like hardest to create or put up? I hope I asked that the right way.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's in our relationships,
Yes.
Our romantic relationships or family. Like that's kind of like a tie, I would say. Especially because I do couples therapy, but I think too it's the dynamic, because a lot of times there's guilt, like of saying no, or
Yes.
there's an expectation or an obligation that we feel like we might need to fill or we're expected to fill. So I do think that is like the top, family and significant other.
For sure. Yeah. So no one's alone if that's you. I think it's pretty common to feel that. It's just a matter of overcoming it. Okay. And then I'm also going to write in here the issue of control, because if that's you, this was a huge, I didn't even realize this when it came up in a group that I had ran before, codependency, like the need to be needed. And when I figured out that was centered around people's like control issues, it really put the, not problem, but the work had to be on you then to correct that. Right. So I think that that's important. If that is you, like you are not okay with things being out of your control, that you have a control issue. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It can turn into one. But Dr. Caroline, what would you say is like something you can do to start working on that, like an issue of having to always be in control of people and things.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's actually a fantastic book called Codependency No More by Melanie Beattie. I like love love that book. That's really helpful too. But I think with the control factor, it's goes back to awareness. Like if you're not aware it's happening, like you can't address something. So it's building that awareness and then working on it. So being able to catch yourself quicker, instead of maybe it's a day and you realize this is happening, maybe instead of the 24 hours, it's like 18 hours, you're catching yourself a little bit quicker. But I think it's those like bite sizes is where you're really going to see change when you actually address it. But the first thing, awareness, because if you're not aware, how are you going to fix it?
Yes. Yes. And I think sometimes if people say like, you're so controlling, or you just have to, you're a control freak, like those are signs to kind of like, you know, look within and be like, if they're saying it, you know, I might have to address it. So that's important. All right. So I'm going to pause right there before I move to one of my final points. I think I have 2 more left, but I just wanted to give people the chance to kind of share if, you know, you were not.
Yeah, Kristal, I'm glad you did pause for a second, because just something is kind of like swirling in my head. Yeah. Here, I'm using my example, but just dealing with the awareness piece, because it's like, I guess the question that pops in my head is, what scale does one use to determine if they're off tilt in their mental health?
Great question.
You know, is there like a, you know, because like I said, going back to this whole thing about people not even aware that they are sick, you know, that they need help. And I don't know if that's the right terminology. I apologize if it's not, but that they need help, they need therapy, they need counseling, whatever the help is going to be. What scale can someone use as a standard? Because there's perhaps with as many family or cultures or even individuals, there's different scales.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean it's a good one.
Yes, that's true.
That makes sense. Dr. Caroline, you know, I'm just curious to hear what you have to say about that as well.
Yeah, no, I'd be curious to know if there was a scale. I don't believe there is, but don't quote me. That's just been my experience. I think like we have criteria which meets a diagnosis, and that's how we can determine that. But for somebody who's not going to therapy yet or not knowing that there is a problem, I think it's how you feel like just every day, but it's also, are you hearing the same thing from different people? Like Kristal brought up too, like, okay, well, maybe somebody's saying I'm controlling or I'm experiencing this, but I think it's looking around like what people are saying to you, or if there's anything like, I guess it's a little hard to define clearly because everybody is so different and there's still so much we don't know about the human brain because it's just so fascinating. There's so many different facets to it. But I think the biggest thing is your mood and how that fluctuates, and like tracking it yourself, like scaling yourself in a way of like, okay, today I felt like I was a 10, and what that defines for you versus, okay, I'm feeling really low today. Okay, is there a pattern? Is it certain days? Is it the days I'm working? Is it the days I'm around a certain person? Just really collecting that data for yourself, because only you can know that internally, because the therapist can help and a coach can help, but to really identify that, I think I would say just really track it yourself to see the week long or the 2 weeks, and really being able to pick up on a pattern would be the best way, I would say.
Right. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, because the other thing, like, you know, I thank God I'm in fairly good health. So I would really see my primary care doctor once a year, just for yearly physical. One of the questions that always would strike me as strange, he would say, so have you been feeling depressed? Or have you felt depressed? And that's just something that, you know, I would imagine everybody at some point in time in life may feel a little depressed. But when it becomes debilitating or, you know, overwhelming or whatever, but it's just like, just that question made me think, like, have I? Or, you know, so I don't know. It's just.
It's a great question.
Yeah.
I wanted to piggyback off of her. So in actual therapy, and like you said, like a lot of people aren't really seeking that. But if you are, we do have measurement-based tools, we call them. We have them for anxiety, we have them for depression. And basically it's a scale of 1 to 10, 1 to 18. And the higher you score based off what you're feeling and for how long, that determines your severity of depression or anxiety, etc. But I get asked those questions too on my physicals and all those things. That's why you guys should be going to see a doctor, a PCP once a year at least, right? Your annual checkups and things like that, because they are trained to ask those questions, assess for suicidality. Have you had any thoughts of hurting yourself? Have you had thoughts of hurting other people, right? And you have to answer truthfully and not be afraid of that, because it's those moments where we lie or sell ourselves short that we don't really get it addressed. So I hope that helps. And to piggyback off of you, Dr. Caroline, you did mention like it's self-assessment for most of us who don't have resources and won't take that extra step. But ask yourself, if you're waking up every day and it's debilitating, you can't function, it's crippling, you know, you are having suicidal thoughts, or prolonged sadness, like that's enough right there to be like, I got to either reach out to somebody or seek some kind of support. Doesn't matter what it looks like. But those feelings are not normal. I think they're natural to feel like in waves, but for prolonged periods of time, that's not safe for anybody. So I hope that clears it up too.
I got something to say.
Yes.
Yeah, so I just wanted to second what you guys are saying. Like, I think for me personally, when I was going through, you know, some trouble, the only real scale, you know, in regards to what Pastor Greg is talking about, the only real scale I found that was helpful was self-awareness. And I think that's like the most vital scale. And the unfortunate thing is most people, or a lot of people, don't contain that. So, you know, there is a dark side to depression. Most of us don't come out healed. Most of us aren't self-aware to, you know, get through that process. And, you know, as what you guys are talking about, some resort to drugs, some resort to suicide. So it's definitely like Dr. Caroline said, like, you know, there is no real scale, but there are some kind of tools that help. So I feel like obviously if anybody has the wisdom enough to develop that self-awareness, then, you know, we would all be in a better place. But it's funny though, because, you know, as Pastor Greg was saying, every time I got asked that question from a doctor, I wanted to look at him, say the same thing, like, yo, like, ain't we all stressed out here? We all trying to make it. But, you know, one time a doctor actually, I was just, you know, giving him some symptoms. I wasn't even feeling it. I was like dehydrated. And he started asking me those depression questions. And at first I was like, damn, like, what's this dude talking about? And then as I started to talk to him more, I started to realize like I had to think deeper. And I started to actually realize some unhealthy habits that I have began to be accustomed to over like a month's time. So I had to think deeper. So it was like, it turned out good that he asked me those questions, because I had to really self-reflect and evaluate myself after that phone call. Like, man, I did lose track of all this stuff. And look how, you know, I had to realize that it turned into a whole rabbit hole. And it did have an impact on how I was thinking and feeling. So yeah, that, you know, that's all.
You did something good though, in like actually seeking some kind of help, whether it was for physical, medical, whatever. Like that was a stepping stone. So that's good. All right, anybody else? This is good. I hope somebody's taking something away from this.
I have a lot to say. So of course I'm not going to go on and on, but
okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that most of I'm Puerto Rican, grew up in North Philly. You know, it's like that wasn't talked about. So I went on most of my life really dealing with depression. And like we all said, if it's not, you know, if you don't attack it when it starts, it gets worse and worse and worse. So I'm very thankful that I began to really self-reflect and really, I mean, it's been a few years, but more this year than ever. Like I started to journal and all that. But the topic that I love and I adore, and if I could like go on the mountaintop and speak to moms, is to set boundaries with your kids. And so that's an area that, thank God, I got a hold of when my daughter was like, I don't even remember. I just know that like in her, like she's 9 years old. So maybe about 3 years ago, I think it was like 3 years ago when I you know, like I literally would sit and talk to her about
Liz, we lost you.
About, you know, we all matter. You know, like, you want to talk all day long and you want all the attention, whatever. But like, you know, daddy matters, I matter, and you matter. So there's going to be times that daddy and I have to watch, you know, a movie together because that fills our cup, right? Like, that's one of the areas that, you know, like Dr. Carolyn said, you know, like relationship is very important. So like setting boundaries, but also asking those loved ones, like what you need. Because one thing I learned is if you don't tell people what you need, especially those that are very sensitive and those that deal with, you know, depression, like we need our love tank filled. And obviously we don't want to, I feel like there was seasons in my life that I was hanging on to my husband because this is the only thing that I knew, you know, what to do. And I thank God that, you know, he was strong enough that he can carry me in that season. So that's definitely another thing. Like, if you're married, like I'm very big on that. Like, you know, marry someone that, you know, that can carry you in those seasons. Because I think the gentleman that just spoke, like, you know, it's not that we always feel depressed, but there's going to be seasons that we all go through something. And so please get married to someone that you can piggyback on one another when those seasons come, because they're going to come. They're going to come if you can't have a child. They're going to come if someone dies suddenly, like whatever that case, you know, is, you need that. But again, the boundaries, like, you know, my husband knows, like, babe, I'm exhausted. Like thank God he's a very busy guy, but he's very attentive to being a parent to my daughter, you know, thank God that we co-parent that way. But like, I have to tell him, you know, like, babe, today's not a good day for me. So he makes sure that he's there for bedtime, you know, he's there for homework, you know. And so I would say for like 3 years, like I've been really, you know, and listen, most moms, we want to be Wonder Woman. We want to be super moms. We want to, you know, but it's okay. Like I realized that it's okay to do that because that fills my tank, right? That brings me joy. But then knowing when, okay, Liz, you know, like he came home early today and I was so excited I can do this for an hour, you know, and so he has her. So no, like the boundaries is like, OMG, I love that. And also lastly, like I found my voice this year, right? And so I agree with the yes being yes and the no's being yes. So there's times that, you know, someone that is dear to you, you know, that they say something that isn't okay. And in my past, forever, I wouldn't say anything. And like Pastor Gregory or somebody was saying, like, it's literally back and forth in my mind. So now I've realized, wait a minute, Liz, like that triggered something, you know, get your thoughts together to make sure it's not just being sensitive, but then relaying that to that person. Like in love, you know, I had to learn how to do it in love. Sometimes I wouldn't do it in love, but in love to say like, I'm kind of confused, you know, like I did this and this is how you handle it, whatever. And it feels so good. Sometimes people don't like it, but it's the only way we're going to be able to live together in this world and live a joyful life is if our voices are heard again in love and with patience.
Yes. Well said. Thank you. Okay. Well, she's so cute. She lifts her hand up. You see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so
question.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So I came in a little bit late, so I do apologize if this was already answered. But I know that a few people already referenced even the self-awareness and how important it almost seems like that's kind of the main thing to be able to identify other mental health issues. So my question is more like then, and it goes for two different people. It's for teens and then for adults. When people are not self-aware, for teens, like when teens are not self-aware, how do you then go and teach that to them? How can you bring that about to them and also share with them the importance of self-awareness? So getting them to a place that they can be self-aware of themselves, and then in turns, they could be self-aware of others, right? And then that same question, but applying it to adults, people that it sounds like a lot of people within this group are self-aware, have gotten to a place that they have been self-aware, which is awesome. But how about those people that are around us, even family members or people that we work with, things like that? How do we maybe encourage self-awareness or speak about, like, how would that go about? Is that something that we should address if we notice that someone is repeating cycles, is in a dysfunctional situation, or things like that, so that we can bring about self-awareness?
Dr. Caroline?
Yeah, no, those are fantastic questions. I think starting with teens, because I did work with a lot of kids and teens for years as well. I think it's being able to help them vocalize what they're feeling, because a lot of times they are not even aware of their own feelings. Being able to communicate that is so difficult, especially if they grew up in a household where communication wasn't happening, or talking about their feelings in depth, or just even talking about feelings. It's really difficult for them in the beginning, but I think there's so many tools, and like I kind of give them a toolbox. It's not an official toolbox, but I would give them different ways, different activities to really help foster that, to go from the subconscious to the consciousness, for them to be aware, because it's reprogramming the brain, and also it's rewiring it, being able to understand what they're going through in those moments, and being able to vocalize that, and setting boundaries and learning how that unfolds. But there's a lot of tools that I used to use for kids in particular, but I think the biggest thing is just communication, and that segues into adults as well. We don't communicate what's going on, just like Liz said so beautifully, is being able to vocalize that. And I think the more we vocalize it, the more we're able to address it. When we have toxic cycles or anything like that, to address that point, I think it's really difficult for people to become aware, or even to accept what you're saying. Mm-hmm. And it's finding out which way to go. And a lot of times it's trying to vocalize something to somebody that's not ready to receive it. It doesn't always sink through, but it's being able to, when you change your behavior, when you change your approach, it forces other people to change too, of how they receive you, especially when you're setting boundaries, because then you're able to stand your ground and say what you need to in an effective way. But I think the biggest thing is, the more you vocalize it, the more you change, the more you become self-aware, that will impact everyone around you. But at the end of the day, you can only change yourself. You can't change anyone else, but you can change your behavior towards them, if that helps. I hope that answered some of your questions.
Yeah, that was good. I want to piggyback off of you really quick. I feel like teens are not really that far off from adults, to be honest. And I've learned that, like my sister-in-law says a lot, you know, you just have big emotions, and people just want to feel heard and validated. And we often want to like tell them how we think they should feel. And so that's big with teens, that at least that I know that I've worked with. Like, they just want to be understood, even if their emotion it makes zero sense. But like, I understand, right? Like, it's okay to feel angry, and not patting their back, so to speak, which is allowing people to feel what they feel. Because the minute you don't, then that's when the anger comes out, right? And then kind of like pushing you out. And we're like that as adults when someone doesn't validate us. So I just think that's important.
I just want to say one comment. It's just remembering every feeling is valid. It's just how you react to that feeling. Just a disclaimer.
Your feelings are valid. Yes. Good question. Anybody else for Dr. Caroline? Or anybody else who want to share? I will have like 3 quick bullet points, and then we can start to wrap up, because I know people have lives. Going once, going twice. Okay. All right, so I wanted just to remind people that I think it's okay to want to escape our reality sometimes. You know, a lot of us are really stressed out. We have a lot of things going on all the time. And so I think a balance of escaping that reality in a healthy way is good sometimes. But when we're doing it too much, that's another way to measure that I'm running from this, right? If you find yourself burying yourself in too much work, or drinking too much, drugging too much, whatever that thing is for you, where you're constantly distracted, that's an easy indicator to identify, like, I have to deal with some stuff, right? Or it's just not going to go anywhere. Secondly, was vulnerability. And I put that TED Talk in there because I mentioned it on another live and I forgot to put it in the chat. So if you're somebody that struggles with opening up, man or female, that changed my life forever. And I'm not just saying that. Like, I was that person that struggled a lot, and I only really trusted my mom. And since I've learned to trust more people and let them in, so that's been helpful, because I can't always dump stuff on my mom. So just making sure that you watch that if you really struggle with expressing your feelings. And lastly, I had on here just finding an overall balance, because when you start to, I guess that little seesaw goes like this way, and your mental health is just never kind of right here, or even, you know, a priority at all, which is what this topic was about, you're a disservice to not only your family, your friends, work, but yourself. And I think that that's really important, to just constantly find that balance. So Dr. Caroline, how do you find that balance?
So many ways. I think too, it's just the basic necessities. When we've talked about it, sleep, exercise, nutrition, yes. But it's also, for me, being in nature, like even if I'm working out, but just being in nature is like so vital to me. And if it's sometimes too cold to go outside, because I'm a Florida girl through and through, but living in Colorado, it's colder, but being able to just watch something that's funny and like lifting my mood, or like watching something that's uplifting too, not just like something funny, but motivating, or listening to a podcast, reading, doing those things. I do different things, different days, because I don't think one thing always works. And I have like my whole list of things. So when I do feel overwhelmed, and this might be helpful for everyone else too, is I look at my list. Okay, I've tried everything. What else can I do? What other things are on my list? Because especially when you're in that moment of feeling like burnt out or overwhelmed or just tired, you can't always think so straight. So being able to have something written down, at least for me, has been really helpful. And I know it's helped a lot of my clients too. So maybe that could be helpful for someone here. But yeah, that's what I do.
Definitely. All right. So I feel like I could go on and on and on, but I think we landed some major points here. And my goal was really to help you recognize that there is something you need to start working on, and you're not alone. And Dr. Caroline's been great. Like, we bounce off each other. You know, we have mentors. So everyone has something they can work towards and work on, and that's really important. So can you just kind of let everyone know like where they can find you, or put it in the chat before I kind of end the recording so we don't forget, and then we can wrap up.
Yeah, so I put my YouTube channel in there. So I do a lot of tips as well, just different things around life and mental health. So it's already in there, and then I'll add my Instagram. I'm usually on there as well. So if you do have questions, if maybe you didn't feel comfortable asking here, or something comes up later, feel free to reach out as well. It's just my name, Dr. Caroline Iscovitz, for Instagram and Facebook as well, but I'm mostly on Instagram. So yeah, thanks so much for having me, Kristal.
Yeah, thank you for taking time. All right, so these final thoughts, if no one has any, I can give you back your time, and I appreciate everybody for hopping on. You don't know how meaningful this is to a lot of people, so I appreciate everybody on this call. And for those that hopped on late, I did put suicide hotline on there. If you guys know anybody, find it useful, like I feel like that's important. The TED Talks in here, and then we listed a mobile crisis, just so you guys have it. I've honestly had to give it out a few times, like not out, like outside of work, I mean. So it's always good to have those numbers in your phone. I actually had somebody the other day reach out on Instagram with that kind of behavior, so I was able to give that to them. So you just never know. And Jolie, you're welcome. All right, I love you guys, and have a good rest of the night.
Bye.
Bye.